The spotlight hit me like a sniper's scope, and for a split second, I felt like I was back in Fallujah getting painted by enemy fire. Except this wasn't Iraq, and the enemy wasn't some insurgent with an AK. It was a 26-year-old blonde in a $3,000 dress who thought my 15 years of keeping Hamilton and Associates afloat made me some kind of corporate yard sale item. My name's Brian Matthews. I'm 49, and I've been the Senior Risk Management Director here in Dallas for longer than this kid's been out of college. Former Marines, divorced, 2 grown kids who actually respect what I do for a living. At least they used to. "Come on, everyone," Brittany Hamilton slurred into the microphone, champagne sloshing in her other hand. "Don't all bid at once for our favorite dinosaur. Brian from Risk Management. He's single, house-trained, and probably still uses a flip phone." The Omni Dallas ballroom went dead quiet. 280 people in tuxedos and evening gowns, all staring at me like I just stripped naked and started singing the national anthem. I stood there in my rented tux, the same one I wore to my daughter's wedding 3 years ago, feeling every single one of my 49 years. Nobody laughed. They were too busy being mortified for me. See, this whole mess started 6 months earlier when Richard Hamilton decided his princess needed a real job. Not some Instagram influencer nonsense, but an actual position with actual responsibilities. So he made her VP of Strategic Development, whatever the hell that means, and gave her an office 2 doors down from mine. I'd been watching this company's back since 2008, through the financial crisis, through 3 different regulatory overhauls, through more audits than I can count. Saved their bacon when the SEC came sniffing around our derivatives portfolio in 2011. Caught a money laundering scheme that would have put half the board in federal prison back in 2015. But none of that mattered anymore, apparently. What mattered was that Daddy's little girl thought experience was just another word for old. The first sign of trouble came during my initial meeting with Brittany. She waltzed into my office wearing designer jeans and a crop top, phone in one hand, iced coffee in the other. "So, Brian," she said, not bothering to sit down, "I'm going to need you to fast-track approval on some vendor contracts. Daddy says you're the guy who handles all the boring compliance stuff." I looked up from my computer. What kind of vendor contracts? Digital transformation, social media automation, brand synergy consulting. You know, modern business stuff. She was already typing on her phone while talking to me. Nothing you'd understand, but Daddy wants it handled by someone with experience. "I'll need to see the contracts first. Standard procurement review." She finally looked at me. "Review? It's just paperwork. Can't you just, stamp it or whatever?" That's when I knew we had a problem. Over the next few months, I watched Brittany burn through company money like it was Monopoly cash. Catered lunches from restaurants that charged $80 per person for what amounted to fancy sandwiches. A team-building retreat to Austin that cost $45,000 for 12 people and seemed to involve mostly Instagram photo shoots. A consulting contract with a social media firm that was registered to a P.O. box in Nevada. Every time I raised concerns, Richard would wave me off. "She's bringing fresh thinking to the company, Brian. Sometimes you have to spend money to make money. Fresh thinking." Right. The auction was supposed to be for charity. Bachelor auction, they called it. Raise money for some kids' hospital while the single guys in the office got to play eye candy for the wives and secretaries. Harmless fun. Except, I wasn't supposed to be part of it. Nicole's going to handle the bachelor coordination, Richard had told me 2 weeks before the gala. "We just need you to help with the financial oversight." Financial oversight, that's what they call it when they want you to do the work, but none of the credit. Story of my life at Hamilton and Associates. Nicole Peterson from HR had the whole thing organized. Nicole's one of those HR managers who smiles too much and uses words like synergy in normal conversation. She'd lined up 8 bachelors from various departments. Jason Clark from HR, Kevin from analytics, a couple guys from sales, some junior executives. But then Brittany decided the actual bachelors were boring, too predictable. She wanted something memorable, something that would get people talking on social media. And apparently nothing says viral content like publicly humiliating a middle-aged veteran. "No takers?" she continued, swaying slightly on stage. "Seriously? Brian's got great benefits. Full pension, probably knows how to fix a carburetor, and I bet he's got amazing stories about dial-up internet." I wanted to disappear. Wanted the marble floor to crack open and swallow me whole. Instead, I did what Marines do. I stood at attention and took it. Smiled even. Because that's what you do when you're outnumbered and outgunned. You survive and you plan. That's when I saw him. Pierce Richardson, standing near the bar, not laughing, not smiling, just watching. He had the look of a man who'd seen enough corporate politics to know when someone was getting railroaded. Pierce runs Richardson Capital, one of our institutional investors. The kind of guy who doesn't waste time on small talk or fake smiles. He's maybe 55, silver hair, sharp eyes that miss nothing. I'd seen him at board meetings, always taking notes, always asking the questions nobody else wanted to ask. The auction finally moved on to the actual bachelors. Jason Clark from HR went for $500 to some secretary who'd been flirting with him for months. Kevin from Analytics got bid up to $1,200 by his girlfriend, which was sweet in a corporate-approved kind of way. A couple of the sales guys did well, playing up their charm for the crowd. Nobody mentioned the middle-aged risk manager again. I made my way to the bar afterward, ordered a whiskey neat, and tried to pretend my face wasn't burning with embarrassment. The bartender, a kid who couldn't have been more than 25, gave me a sympathetic look as he poured. "Rough night?" he asked quietly. "Getting there." That's when Pierce appeared next to me, like he'd been waiting for the right moment. "Hell of a show," he said, ordering the same drink. "Yeah, well, kids these days. You know what I find interesting about kids these days?" He took a sip of his whiskey, didn't even wince at the burn. "They think inexperience is the same thing as innovation." I looked at him sideways. "That right? Take young Ms. Hamilton. Brilliant girl, I'm sure. Stanford MBA, social media savvy, all that modern business training. But you know what she doesn't have? Common sense?" He smiled at that, the first genuine expression I'd seen from him all evening. Institutional memory. The kind that prevents companies from making the same expensive mistakes twice. The kind that recognizes patterns before they become problems. We stood there for a minute, watching the crowd. Brittany was holding court near the stage, surrounded by junior executives and their wives, all of them laughing too loud at her jokes. She was telling some story, gesturing wildly with her champagne glass, completely oblivious to the fact that half the room was still uncomfortable about what she'd done to me. "You've been here how long?" Pierce asked. 15 years. Since right before the financial crisis. That's what I thought. You were the one who caught the derivatives issue in 2011, weren't you? I was surprised he knew about that. It wasn't exactly public knowledge. Yeah, that was me. Saved the company about $50 million in losses, if I remember correctly. Something like that. Pierce nodded slowly. And the money laundering scheme in 2015? You do your homework. It's my job. Richardson Capital doesn't invest in companies that don't know how to protect themselves. He finished his drink, set the glass down carefully. Question is, who's protecting Hamilton and Associates now? It was a loaded question, and we both knew it. The answer was nobody. Richard was too busy playing proud father to notice his daughter was bleeding money. The rest of the executive team was too scared of stepping on toes to speak up, and the board was getting their information filtered through Richard, which meant they weren't getting the whole picture. "If you ever want to discuss institutional memory," Pierce said, pulling out a business card, "give me a call." I took the card, felt the expensive weight of it between my fingers. What kind of discussion? The kind that helps investors make informed decisions about their continued participation in a company. He walked away after that, leaving me alone at the bar with my whiskey and a business card that felt like it weighed about 50 pounds. I kept that card in my wallet for 3 weeks before I used it. Not because I was scared, but because I wanted to be smart about it. See, there's a difference between revenge and justice, and I'd learned that distinction in places where making the wrong call got people killed. During those 3 weeks, I did what Marines do best. Reconnaissance. I started paying closer attention to Brittany's operations, documenting everything with the kind of detail I used to put into after-action reports. The social media consulting contract was the first red flag. $35,000 over 6 months to a company called Digital Synergy Solutions, registered to a P.O. box in Nevada. I ran a background check through our standard vendor verification process and found exactly nothing. No website, no business registration, no tax filings, just a shell company that existed on paper and nowhere else. Then there was the Austin retreat. Brittany had sold it to Richard as a cross-departmental team-building initiative to foster innovation and creative thinking. What it actually was: 12 people spending 3 days at a luxury resort with yoga sessions, meditation workshops, and catered meals from Austin's most expensive restaurants. Total cost: $45,000. I pulled the receipts. $800 per night hotel rooms. $150 per person dinners at establishments that served molecular gastronomy and farm-to-table fusion. A $3,000 mindfulness consultant who led 2 hours of breathing exercises. The kicker? 2 of the 12 attendees were Brittany's sorority sisters who didn't even work for the company. They were listed as external strategic consultants at $500 per day. I started a file. Nothing dramatic, just a simple folder on my personal laptop where I kept copies of everything. Vendor contracts, expense reports, travel vouchers, email chains, all perfectly legal for me to have since most of it had crossed my desk for approval anyway. The call to Pierce happened on a Tuesday morning. I was sitting in my car in the parking garage, looking at his business card, thinking about what my drill sergeant used to say. When you're outnumbered, you don't charge the hill. You find someone with bigger guns. Pierce Richardson had bigger guns. We met at a coffee shop in downtown Dallas, nothing fancy. Just 2 businessmen having a conversation. He arrived exactly on time, carrying a leather portfolio and wearing the kind of suit that cost more than most people's cars, but didn't scream about it. "Mr. Matthews," he said, sitting down across from me. "Thanks for calling. Thanks for meeting." He opened his portfolio, pulled out a manila folder. "Before we talk, I want you to understand something. Richardson Capital has been tracking certain irregularities in Hamilton and Associates' spending patterns. We're not looking to cause trouble, but we have a fiduciary duty to our investors to ensure their money is being managed responsibly." He slid the folder across the table. "What I'm about to show you isn't privileged information. It's all data we're entitled to see as institutional investors, but I think you'll find it interesting." I opened the folder. Inside were expense reports, travel vouchers, vendor payments, all approved by Richard Hamilton, all technically legal, all completely wasteful. But what caught my attention wasn't what was there, it was how it was organized. Someone had been tracking patterns, connecting dots, building a case. "Your Ms. Hamilton has expensive tastes," Pierce said, keeping his voice low. "Catered team lunches from restaurants that cost more than most people's monthly rent. Business trips to conferences that don't seem to exist. And this consulting contract with Digital Synergy Solutions." "The Nevada Shell Company," I said. "You know about that? I've been doing my own homework." I closed the folder, slid it back across the table. "Question is, what are you planning to do with this information?" Pierce leaned back in his chair, studied me for a moment. "That depends on what you can tell me about the institutional memory of this company. The board's been asking uncomfortable questions about our continued investment. They want to know if Hamilton and Associates is still the well-managed firm we invested in 5 years ago, or if it's becoming something else entirely." "What kind of questions?" "Risk management effectiveness, compliance oversight, strategic decision-making processes." He paused. "Whether the company has adequate safeguards against the kind of financial irregularities that can sink a firm overnight." I understood what he was really asking. Not whether I wanted to get revenge on Brittany Hamilton, but whether I was willing to help him protect his investment by ensuring the company was properly managed. The revenge would just be a side effect. "What do you need from me? Nothing illegal, nothing that violates your employment agreement. Just the kind of institutional memory that helps investors make informed decisions." He pulled out a legal pad, wrote down a phone number. "If you ever notice anything that might affect the financial stability of Hamilton and Associates, I'd appreciate a heads up." Over the next 6 weeks, I became Pierce's early warning system. Not a spy, not a saboteur, just a professional doing his job with a little more attention to detail than usual. I started documenting everything with military precision. Every questionable expense, every vendor contract that didn't pass the smell test, every meeting where Brittany made decisions based on what would look good on Instagram rather than what made business sense. The digital transformation project was the breaking point. Brittany had convinced Richard to approve $150,000 for a complete overhaul of the company's online presence. New website, social media automation, brand synergy development, whatever that meant. She presented it to the executive team on a Wednesday morning, standing at the head of the conference table in a designer suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. "Traditional thinking has held us back for too long," she said, clicking through her PowerPoint slides. "Need to move beyond the mindset of our legacy employees." She looked directly at me. "People like Brian here represent the old way of doing business. Risk-averse, technology-resistant, afraid of change." The room was full of department heads, senior staff, people I'd worked with for over a decade, all of them watching as the CEO's daughter explained why experience was the enemy of progress. "The future belongs to digital natives who understand disruption," she continued, "not to people who still think a hard drive is something you do on the freeway." That got a laugh from the younger staff members, a small one, but enough to make my chest tight with the kind of anger I hadn't felt since my last deployment. Richard was sitting at the far end of the table, beaming with pride at his daughter's presentation. He probably thought she was showing initiative, demonstrating leadership potential. What he didn't see was the eye rolling from the accounting department, the uncomfortable shifting from legal, the way the marketing director was looking at her phone instead of the presentation. "Questions?" Brittany asked, scanning the room. I raised my hand. "What's the ROI projection on this investment?" She blinked. "Well, it's really more about positioning ourselves for the future." "I understand that, but $150,000 is a significant allocation. What metrics will you use to measure success?" "Engagement, brand awareness. Modern KPIs that might not make sense to someone from the old school." She was getting flustered, which wasn't the reaction she wanted in front of her father. "Can you be more specific? Percentage increase in web traffic? Lead generation targets? Customer acquisition costs?" Richard finally spoke up. "Brian, I think we can trust Brittany to handle the details." "Of course," I said, making a note on my pad. "I just want to make sure we have clear benchmarks for success. From a risk management perspective, any investment without measurable outcomes gets flagged as speculative." The meeting ended with Brittany getting her approval, but the damage was done. Several department heads approached me afterward, quietly expressing concerns about the company's direction. Nobody wanted to go on record, but the sentiment was clear. They were worried about Richard's judgment when it came to his daughter. That afternoon, I sent Pierce a detailed breakdown of the digital transformation budget. Not the sanitized version Brittany had presented, but the real numbers. $45,000 for a website that could be built for $15,000. $30,000 for social media consulting from a company that specialized in influencer marketing for fashion brands. $25,000 for something called synergy optimization that no one could explain. Pierce's response was immediate. "Board meeting next Tuesday. Can you attend as risk management liaison?" It was happening faster than I'd expected. But then again, when you're dealing with institutional investors who have millions on the line, things tend to move quickly, once they decide action is necessary. The board meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m. in the main conference room. I spent the weekend preparing, organizing all my documentation, making sure every number was accurate, every claim was backed up by evidence. This wasn't about personal vendetta anymore. This was about professional responsibility. Monday morning, Brittany cornered me outside my office. She was holding a coffee cup that probably cost $15 and wearing an expression that could have melted steel. "I know what you're doing," she said. "I'm doing my job. You're trying to sabotage me because you're jealous of my position. Brittany, I'm trying to protect this company from making expensive mistakes. That's what risk management means. Daddy's not going to let you get away with this." I looked at her for a long moment. This entitled kid who thought the world owed her success simply because of who her father was. We'll see. Tuesday morning couldn't come fast enough. Tuesday morning arrived with the kind of crisp Dallas air that makes you think anything's possible. I got to the office early, reviewed my notes one last time, and prepared for what I knew would be the most important meeting of my career. The main conference room was set up like a courtroom. Pierce sat at one end of the long mahogany table with two other Richardson Capital representatives I didn't recognize. The board members filled the sides, 8 people who controlled the future of Hamilton and Associates. Richard sat at the head, looking older than I'd ever seen him. Brittany was beside him, checking her phone, apparently oblivious to the gravity of the situation. I took my seat near the middle, close enough to see everyone's reactions, but far enough away to avoid looking like I was part of any particular faction. "Gentlemen, ladies," Richard began, "Pierce Richardson has requested this meeting to discuss some concerns about our recent strategic initiatives. I'm sure we can clear up any misunderstandings." Pierce stood up, opened his portfolio with the deliberate care of a prosecutor presenting evidence. "Thank you, Richard. What I'm about to present isn't based on misunderstandings. It's based on 8 months of documented financial irregularities that raise serious questions about management oversight. He distributed folders to each board member. Page 1 shows questionable expenses totaling $240,000 over 8 months. Page 2 details vendor contracts with companies that don't appear to exist. Page 3 outlines travel and entertainment costs that exceed industry standards by 400%. I watched the board members flip through the pages, their expressions getting more serious with each document. Margaret Wilson, the audit committee chair, was taking notes. David Torres from legal was frowning at the vendor contract details. "These are all legitimate business expenses," Brittany said, finally looking up from her phone. "Strategic investments in the company's future." "Ms. Hamilton," Pierce replied calmly. "Can't you explain the business justification for a $45,000 team-building retreat that included non-employees listed as consultants? Those were strategic advisors helping with innovative thinking. Strategic advisors who happened to be your sorority sisters from Stanford." The room went quiet. Richard was staring at his daughter like he'd never seen her before. Margaret Wilson cleared her throat. "Mr. Matthews, as our risk management director, what's your assessment of these expenditures?" This was my moment. Everything I'd worked toward for the past 2 months came down to the next 5 minutes. "From a risk management perspective," I said, "these spending patterns represent several red flags. Vendor contracts without proper due diligence, travel expenses that don't align with business objectives, marketing investments without measurable KPIs or ROI targets." I pulled out my own folder, the one I'd been building since that night at the gala. More concerning is the pattern of decision-making that prioritizes perception over performance. The digital transformation project, for example, allocates $150,000 for website development that could be accomplished for $45,000, with the additional funds going to social media consulting that appears to focus on personal branding rather than corporate objectives. Brittany's face was getting redder by the minute. "This is ridiculous. You're all ganging up on me because you're scared of change." "Ms. Hamilton," said David Torres, "these aren't personal attacks. These are legitimate fiduciary concerns." Pierce took control again. "The board needs to understand that Richardson Capital represents $12 million in investment. We have a responsibility to our investors to ensure that capital is being managed effectively. Based on current trends, we're projecting a 15% decline in operational efficiency over the next 18 months if these spending patterns continue." 15%? Richard looked like he'd been punched in the stomach. "That's a conservative estimate," I added. "Without proper oversight, we're looking at potential regulatory issues, cash flow problems, and investor confidence erosion." The board members were whispering among themselves. I could see the tide turning, the moment when institutional responsibility overrode personal loyalty. Margaret Wilson spoke first. "Mr. Hamilton, we need to discuss restructuring the executive oversight process." "What kind of restructuring?" Richard asked, though he already knew the answer. "The kind that ensures strategic decisions are based on business metrics rather than—" She paused diplomatically. "Individual preferences." Pierce closed his portfolio. "Richardson Capital is prepared to maintain our investment, but only with proper governance structures in place. We need experienced leadership in strategic roles, not experimental appointments." Brittany finally understood what was happening. "Daddy, you're not going to let them do this to me." Richard looked at his daughter, then at the board, then at the numbers spread across the table. The numbers that showed 8 months of entitled spending and strategic incompetence. "Brittany," he said quietly, "maybe it's time you explored opportunities that better match your interests." The resignation was formal but swift. Brittany Hamilton, VP of Strategic Development, would be leaving Hamilton and Associates to pursue other ventures. No termination, no scandal, just a quiet exit that preserved everyone's dignity. The restructuring happened immediately. New oversight procedures, mandatory ROI projections for all strategic initiatives, and enhanced risk management authority for major expenditures. And me? They offered me exactly what I'd earned but never been given. Senior Vice President of Risk Management and Corporate Oversight, 22% pay increase, seat on the Executive Committee, direct reporting authority to the board. All the respect and recognition I should have had years ago. Pierce stopped by my new office the day after the announcement. "Congratulations," he said. "Hell of a thing. Institutional memory." "Yeah, well, sometimes the old ways are old for a reason. You know what I find interesting about this whole situation? What's that? She was right about one thing. The future does belong to people who understand disruption. He smiled. She just didn't realize you'd be the one doing the disrupting. I kept that coffee shop meeting card on my desk for months afterward. Not as a trophy, but as a reminder. In a world that's always looking for the next big thing, sometimes the biggest thing is simply knowing what you're doing. The company's doing better now. 3 profitable quarters in a row, stable growth, renewed investor confidence. The digital transformation project got redesigned with actual metrics and reasonable budgets. We hired a proper consulting firm instead of relying on social media magic. And me? I'm still here, still watching the company's back, still keeping us out of trouble. The difference is, now people listen when I talk. Now experience means something again. Sometimes the best revenge isn't destruction. Sometimes it's simply being right all along and making sure everyone knows it. Brittany, last I heard, she's working for some tech startup in Austin, probably telling them all about the dinosaurs in traditional industries who don't understand innovation. But here's what I learned from 2 tours in Iraq and 15 years in corporate America. The world needs both dreamers and guardians. People who imagine what could be, and people who make sure what is doesn't fall apart while we're building something new. I'm proud to be a guardian, and after everything that happened, I'm finally working for people who understand the difference.